for a miracle to occur. Your ego will keep you dialed into the frequency of, it's never worked in the past, so why should it work now? Most of us are around a 5 or a 6, but the miracle zone is up at number 10 or higher. Healing past trauma and dealing with your shadow is what allows you to turn up the dial. There's no point in focusing on all the negativity in the world 24/7. All that does is lower your energy. The road to nowhere is what you're on when you refuse to turn your dial from the frequency you're on right now. And then she quoted the scripture that I just quoted about when I was a child, I spoke as a child, etc. So there are two things that she mentioned in that piece that I want to go back now and comment on. The first one, which I know might at first sound a little insensitive, but just hear me out, please, is when she said, there's no point in focusing on all the negativity in the world 24/7. All that does is lower your energy. All right, let's use as our example what's going on in Texas right now. Is it horrible? Yes. Are people suffering? Yes. Could it have been avoided? Most probably to a certain degree, yes. Are there individuals who could be blamed? Yes. Should they be held accountable? Yes. And all those same things could also go for what's happening nationwide as far as COVID. But here's the deal. Tragedies occur. That's just part of this life here on earth. Our earth existence, as Esther Hicks says, is full of contrast. So when, not if, but when things like this happen, we all have a choice. And right now I'm focusing on those of us who are not being directly affected by it. I'm not talking about the actual people in Texas or the actual people who are dealing with COVID at the moment. That is a different, slightly different teaching for another time. I'm talking today about those of us who are observing the situations from the outside, because I want to talk about that part of the Mary J. Blige song where she admits there was something inside her at one time where she was on a lower frequency and she liked or was attracted to the drama. I think in the case of that song, she was talking about drama that was in her own life. But here I'm talking about our culture that is somewhat addicted to drama that's not even directly affecting us, yet we take it on as if it's ours and we become outraged on behalf of others. Now, this is an extreme example, I know, but stay with me here. Sometimes we find it impossible to raise our frequency or to maintain our frequency at a high level because we immerse ourselves in drama that is not directly affecting us and that we really have no right to judge. For instance, let's use a different example before people think that I am not compassionate towards the people in Texas or people who have suffered from COVID. I have heard more than a couple of people who are cancer survivors say that being diagnosed with cancer was the greatest gift they had ever had because it completely changed the way they looked at life, or it put them on a different path in life, or because it allowed them to help others in a way that would not have been possible otherwise. And it's not just a few accounts, it's person after person after person who ends up saying this. As an outside observer, we might not understand this. We might think that's crazy because it's not our journey. And we can't imagine anyone ever choosing to have cancer. But we have no way of knowing what lessons that person came here to learn. We have no idea what they agreed to before they incarnated from the spiritual realm into a physical body, and we have no idea what soul contracts they made before they got here. So now do you see why I spent a little time at the beginning today talking about considering the belief that we not only choose to come here, but we choose our circumstances? Because if we believe that, then no matter what it looks like from the outside, we have to be careful not to judge another person's journey based on or from the perspective of our journey. The second thing she mentioned in that piece that I want to talk about now is when she said, healing past trauma and dealing with your shadow is what allows you to turn up the dial, to what she referred to as the miracle zone, which is a certain frequency. Healing our own past trauma is really all we're responsible for and should be job number one for all of us. I'm not saying we shouldn't help others. I'll speak about that more in a little later too. But our first and most important responsibility is to heal our own trauma. Because, again, big picture is for all of us to be able to raise the corporate vibration. How does that happen? When each of us is able to raise our own vibration. So what keeps us from being able to do that? Getting bogged down in the low frequency of drama that doesn't even belong to us. Thus, not being able to heal the trauma that does belong to us and is our responsibility to heal. Now, I want to talk for a minute about the shift that's taking place. We are shifting, as I've said many times before, from a very masculine, dominant, and oriented way of dealing with things to a more balanced, feminine approach. Keep that in mind as I read this next piece from April Shaley. She says, in mythology, there is a character called Chericlo. She is the wife of Chiron, who is the wounded healer. And she is a healer as well. She represents a very feminine yin energy. And when I say that, that's the yin and the yang principle. The yang is the masculine, active. The yin is the feminine, receptive. She symbolizes the ability to hold space by simply being, by being present, not by fighting, not by being aggressive, but by being devoted to caring. Her husband, Chiron, is the wise teacher of medicine, but he himself is wounded, and she is his caretaker. She cares for him so he can share his wisdom and knowledge with others. She is his strong support. What I believe she symbolizes for all of us in the present day is the need to be our own support, to be able to bring ourselves comfort when we are anxious, and to facilitate our own healing. She represents our ability to come back to our own hearts. Chiron teaches the medicine, but she is the medicine in action. She is not the fixer, she is the witness. And the more we are able to step back and be the witness, not act out on our sense of outrage, but just pause long enough to see the bigger picture, the freer we will become and the more healing we will experience. Okay, so what she's saying here is we're moving into a space and time when we deal with even our own healing in a more feminine, receptive way, as opposed to having the attitude of fighting the disease or attacking the problem. So remember when we talked about conspiracy theories, how they always set up this epic battle between good and evil? Okay, that's the same thing. That's where that whole attitude of having to fight comes from. I want to give you a couple of practical examples now of how we do this from a piece by a woman named Jumana Sophia called Wisdom for Companioning Your Traumas. She says, number one, know your activation signature. Just like your written signature is unique, how you feel when you get triggered or activated by trauma is also unique. As most people know, sometimes you can have an emotional reaction that seems out of proportion and doesn't add up to whatever it is that's in front of you that has activated this reaction. This usually happens as a result of personal trauma that has not yet been healed and integrated. So that's an important point she just made there. And again, it's why we have to guard against getting too wrapped up in drama or tragedy that doesn't affect us. Or rather, it helps us understand why we have the tendency to do that, because it's triggering some unhealed issue or trauma within us. So we have this gigantic reaction, such as outrage, when we see what's going on with other people or on the news, but it's really all about something that's still inside of us that needs to be healed. So how do we know when this is happening? She describes here her own signature, and she says she realizes she's being activated when she notices her pace is increasing in her physical actions as well as the pace of her thoughts. So we all know what she's talking about when your heart starts racing and you begin to panic and your mind begins to spiral out of control with thoughts, and you often jump to a completely irrational conclusion that later you might even laugh about. I am the poster child for that behavior in my past. She goes on to say that when this happens, she becomes hyper vigilant and her energy becomes dispersed. So let's just quickly define what hyper vigilant means. It's defined as a state of greatly increased alertness where you are extremely sensitive to your surroundings. Like, what's that? That's hypervigilance. It can make you feel overly aware of hidden dangers, whether they are real or imagined. It also presents itself in extreme cleanliness, like germaphobes. That is a form of hypervigilance. Or when you'll only eat certain foods because you don't trust, the ingredients or whoever has made it. So she goes on to describe it as feeling as if a million things need to be done or focused on all at once. Another symptom is emotionally or mentally checking out. Literally as if you are not there experiencing what you're experiencing, but rather are somewhere else. When you know your activation signature, you immediately realize when you're in this state. And what you need to remember at this point is that what is true is that you are activated. All the other things that are going through your head, all the things that you fear, and all the things you think you need to do to fix it may or may not be true. But the only thing that is true for certain in that moment is that you are activated. So when you get familiar with your signature, you can just stop for a moment, and instead of letting your emotions hijack you and begin interpreting reality for you, you can understand that the only thing you need to tend to at that moment is the fact that you are activated. After you begin to recognize your signature, step 2 is know the medicine. Know what to do about it. So whichever way it expresses itself, look to balance it by doing the opposite. For example, if you're hypervigilant and spinning out of control, reel yourself back in. Go in the opposite direction of where you're going. Contract back inside yourself and slow down your pace, both physically and mentally. Okay? So spinning out of control decentralizes you. So when you're in that state, you need to come back to your center. On the other extreme, if your signature is the opposite and causes you to freeze up and glaze over and go somewhere else in your mind, then do something. Act. Okay? If it freezes you, the opposite of that is action. She says, do anything. Just start moving your body. Dance. If it's nothing but beginning to name your surroundings, she says, I'm sitting in a chair. The chair is blue. I am in my living room. Just anything that will get your mind out of that deadlock that it's in. Remember that trauma is something that has overwhelmed your system. You were not able to process all of it at once, so it got put somewhere else. And when you see something in front of you that looks overwhelming to others, even if it's not happening to you, it triggers or activates that unprocessed trauma in you. So you need to learn to determine what's yours and what's not yours. And remember that you can only tend to what is yours. That's why when we get outraged sometimes on behalf of others about what's happening to them, because it's triggering and activating feelings in us about traumas we have experienced. But we have no idea how they are experiencing whatever it is that's happening to them, or what the final outcome of it might be for them. Just like I talked about the cancer survivors. Once they get on the other side of whatever it is they're experiencing, they may consider that event a gift in their life. And so you have no way as an outsider of knowing or determining that. So this is a good time to remember that their journey is not your journey, and you have no idea what lessons they agreed to come here to learn. Okay, so I want to talk here for just a minute about, I said I'd come back to this helping others. Sometimes, I've talked about this before, we get overwhelmed about, well, we can't help everybody. Like, every time you stop at a red light and see a homeless person wanting money, you feel bad that you can't help them all. So I've talked to you about this concept before that I've developed in my life in order not to get overwhelmed with feelings like that. I have told God and made a decision that if God puts, or life, the universe puts somebody directly in my path and makes it so very clear that I am supposed to help this person and I have the means to do it, then I will. If I don't worry about the dogs that are freezing on the commercials with, I can't. If a dog shows up at my doorstep and I want to take it in, nurse it back to life or take it to the Humane Society, whatever, that's right in front of me to do. But I can't worry about everything that's outside that scope, because that's only going to bring my energy down. Okay, so what I'm saying is, like, if you're concerned about Texas, send some money to a charity, but then be at peace. Don't continue to dwell on it. All right, now I want to read a piece from a conference of Esther Hicks's, where she's speaking to a gentleman who has taken being outraged on behalf of others to the extreme. And he is suffering because of it. And I love her response to him, because she doesn't tell him he's wrong. She just patiently and lovingly explains to him that he has a choice of what frequency he wants to live on. And she helps him see that he has created a life of misery for himself, largely by taking on drama and problems that are not his to solve. Okay, so he speaks first. And he's taking issue with her teaching that says you attract into your life what you want, and that your experience is a match to whatever level of vibration you're on. He has become convinced that this is not the truth. He says, I used to hold the belief that with enough awareness and a well-designed philosophical system, the human species could flourish. I realize now that no system will ever work, because human beings are only interested in pursuing their own selfish interest at the expense of others. As I survey the infestation on this planet, I am disgusted. I now feel mostly hatred for people and their ignorance, stupidity, and petty strivings towards shallow money trenches they dig to insulate themselves and parade around in tacky luxury. I see the majority of people trapped in lives that bear no resemblance to their desires, and more often than not, suffering in the most awful ways as a result of others inserting themselves into their experience. And you're never going to convince me that 6 million victims of World War II genocide, he's referring to the Holocaust, or any other of the many genocides over history for that matter, were all a vibrational match to that experience. Okay, remember that. We're going to come back to that later. He continues, I have absolutely no doubt that history will repeat itself and wars will dominate the majority of people once again for the next several thousand years. So, wow, can we say, wah, wah. That's what he said to her. So she then responds to him. And remember that when she speaks at these conferences, she refers to herself as we, not I, because she believes she's channeling these beings, which I've given you my opinion on that before. Whether she is or whether she's not, it's good information. I believe she's speaking in a language the people who come to hear her can understand. So whether or not she is doesn't matter. What she says is good. She says, we don't disagree with anything you've said, and we would not for a moment express that there is anything inappropriate about the perspective that you found. Anyone with a reasonable mind, which includes everyone in this room and those looking on, would agree in part with a lot of the things that you said. There are horrendous, unfair, unthinkable, unspeakable acts and behaviors that are going on all around the world. In other words, this is a world of contrast of immense proportions. And when we say it's the best of times and the worst of times, we're not kidding, because the contrast is becoming greater and greater. Man's ability to inflict pain and harm upon one another is increasing, as is man's ability to find love and harmony. So you see what she's saying here? Yes, in some ways mankind is getting more depraved, finding more and more ways to hurt each other. But on the other side of that, on the other end of the spectrum, which we'll talk about more in a moment, man is also finding more ways to create love and peace and harmony. In other words, man is finding more ways to raise the collective vibration. Okay, you know that story in the Bible about the sheep and the goats? Okay, it's becoming very, very clear what you're either on this side or you're on that side. She goes on. We get that when you are a part of a world that has access to so much information and so much detail, sometimes it would make you feel foolish to put your head in the sand and pretend that unspeakable things either had not happened or are not happening, because the fact is they are happening all around you. But having said all of that, we also know that every one of you came forth into these human bodies with clear foresight of what was here. Not one of you believed that everything was all smoothed out. Not one of you wanted that, because you believed you would be able to carve your life out of the content that was already here. And not one of you would have come if you didn't believe you would have choices. It's hard to believe that people who have been given free will are living out these lives full of things you view as unwanted, because it's hard to believe they would choose something so horrible or unthinkable. It's hard to believe that. And many people don't realize they are making these choices, so it feels like it's being done to them. And so they believe there must be some other factor involved. There must be some source of darkness or evil, or there must be some cosmic debt to pay. You come up with all kinds of things as your explanation for these unwanted things in your life, because the majority of people don't want, nor will they accept, such a simplistic answer as we give to things that feel so big. But we want you to understand that unless you start with the basic understanding of how it is these things are coming to you, then you cannot understand how anything is coming to anyone else. Wow. So she's basically saying here, you have to understand your own journey and how the law of attraction works in your own life before you can begin to understand it for anyone else. She continues, you are taking upon yourself the burdens and discomfort of the lives of so many others over which you have no creative control. So the injustice you are feeling is because you personally cannot do anything about any of it. You're taking on more than is yours to take, and any individual that is experiencing any of the pieces of which you have spoken is not feeling as badly about it, for all you know, as you are. What you are not accounting for is that they might be engaged in coping mechanisms that you know nothing about. Now, that's a difficult belief to swallow, but that's what she's saying is you may be feeling worse about whatever's going on with them than they are. But that's something else we might need to think about, that while we're sitting watching something happen to others on TV, we don't have access to their experience, to the adrenaline they have, or know anything about their particular circumstance. We're just joining in their drama secondhand and allowing it to pull us down and keep us down in this low frequency. So then she starts talking to him about who he is as a powerful creator, as we all are. She says, we have discovered that by knowing what we know, our life is joy. And you have discovered that by knowing what you know, your life is one of misery. We just want to explain to you that there are choices. We don't disagree with you that most people aren't aware of the precise consequences of their choices. We do not even disagree with you that there are people who have evil intentions who look for ways to put others in precarious positions. But we will never agree with you that the world is without the ability to create its own reality. All right, so if we agree with this, that the world and everyone in it does indeed have the ability to create our own reality, then imagine just for a moment this scenario with me. There's a woman that I follow on Facebook, and you should go follow her. She's wonderful. Her name is May, M-E-I hyphen Lynn, or Lon, L-A-N, Maurits, M-A-U-R-I-T-S. And so what she does is, she may be from the United States. I don't think so. She looks like she's from an Asian country. But she just has a Facebook page, and she will get on there, and she will just sing. And it's not words, it's not a language, it's just these oohs and ahs, and sometimes she has music in the back, and sometimes she does it a cappella, and I promise you, it is one of the most beautiful things I have ever heard. And I've heard her talk before about the fact that when she feels overwhelmed in herself, that's what she does. She gets on Facebook or YouTube, and she just sings. And so the last time she did this is what she wrote. She said, "This song is dedicated to any part of humanity that is hurting right now and could use prayer and hope. If you are listening, please join me and take a moment to send out your love to any person or place that you know could use it." Now, contrast that with what people did when they felt triggered and outraged on January 6th. Their choice was to meet it with violence and outrage. Her choice is to meet that with, "Join me in sending peace and love." You know, on those days that we were doing the meditation together, which I'm still continuing, but on those days in between when the riot happened on January 6th and the day of the inauguration, when I would meditate, a part of my vision in my head was just people standing on the Capitol steps, hand in hand, ringing it around. And, and I know it's COVID and you're not supposed to hold hands, but it was a vision, so I could do it. So I envisioned that, like, as all of that anger and hateful energy would come up toward them, that their love would just kind of dissolve it and push it back. And nobody had to fight each other. Nobody had to hit each other. Nobody had to throw anything. It was their high vibration of love that just kind of dissolved all the outrage. Now, you might think that's impossible, but somewhere, some group of people has got to start believing that that's possible, or we're never going to change our reality. Okay, so then he back to Esther Hicks. He challenges her again about a few things, and her next thing that she says to him is really very important. She says, "Someone who feels as strongly as you do from your perspective would say that we're just teaching people to put their heads in the sand and that ignorance is bliss." And he nods his head in agreement that that's what he thinks. And she says, "And to that we would say, having your head in the sand is good if the alternative is to be focused upon something that would cause us to attract something we don't want. And ignorance is bliss if attention to whatever you're ignoring would cause you to be in a vibration that will only get you more of what you don't want." Whoo! Now let's break that down a little bit, because this is the heart of what I'm getting at today. She's saying you should only focus on drama or feel the outrage if you can then step back, detach, become the observer, the witness, and realize there's a bigger picture to consider than just the little piece you're focusing on. Because if you can't look at it and keep yourself in a high vibration, then yes, it's better to just not look. If looking at it and focusing on it is going to cause you to become uncentered and scattered, if it's going to activate you, then it would be better to remain ignorant of it, because, as we know, what you focus on, you create more of. What you align with, you attract more of. That's how powerful you are. So don't take on the burdens of others unless you can do it with some level of detachment, because you being in a low vibration, as she pointed out earlier, sometimes even lower than the person experiencing it, does nothing to help them. You've got to be up here on a higher vibration if there's any hope of you reaching down and pulling them up. Okay, so this culture of outrage that humanity has gotten itself into is doing nothing but pulling the collective vibration down. I want to end now with a piece by Dr. Kim Duramo that I believe nicely wraps up all the points that have been made today and highlights the importance of us beginning to focus on healing our own trauma so that we can raise our individual vibrations, which will in turn raise the collective vibration. Dr. Kim says, "We are, first and foremost, energy. We experience ourselves as physical, but we are literally pure energy. So whether you believe it or not, the fact remains you and I are pure energy. So let's look at how we can best work with ourselves as energetic beings. Because we are pure energy, we are either in a frequency of density, physical, which is where we feel solid, heavy, and separate from other beings and other objects, or we're in a frequency of lightness, energetic, which is where we feel constantly connected to all that is. We're in non-resistance to the flow of universal energy. We feel abundant, and we feel that love is the essence of who we are. It's a continuum, and she had a chart that she showed, with a line of this is one end of the spectrum and this is the other. So she points to one end and she says, down here on the end of density, where we totally identify with only our physical body, is where our mind resides. And this is where things like fear, lack, and pain are created. And that's where they live. Now, this is where the gentleman that was talking to Esther Hicks, he was totally down there on that end of the spectrum. This is also the place where things like illness and disease, both in the physical body and in a mental sense, as well as in our relationships, get organized, arranged, and held in place. So when you're on that end of the spectrum, if you can find a way to move up the scale just a little, maybe just 2%, all of that density and the things that are created and that live there will begin to loosen their grip on you. Maybe you achieve this through a little EFT, and what she means when she says that is this tapping method that some people do where they speak to themselves as they tap on parts of their body. Or maybe you do it through meditation or affirmations, anything that will raise your frequency a little higher on the spectrum. Now, for me, I like to look at pictures of people I love or listen to beautiful music, things that make me happy. Or, like my brother's favorite go-to when he's having to work himself out of something, watch a funny movie, laugh. You have no idea how healing laughter is or how useful it is, even in very serious situations. He was actually telling us a story on Sunday afternoon about two ladies who used to go to our church. They're twins, and their mother, they were young, believe they were teenagers, weren't they, when their mother was in the hospital dying. And it was a very, very sad situation. And so he and Brandy had gone to the hospital as their pastors to be with them. So they were out in the hall crying, and he said that, they had kind of passed the point of sadness. They were actually angry at the fact that their mother was dying so young and they couldn't do anything about it. They were outraged. And so what he thought to do, which some people might find controversial, but it worked, is he said he thought of that movie Still Magnolias, the funeral scene of when, she grabs and says, hit her, because Malin was saying, I'm so mad, I just want to hit something. And so he said he took Brandy and he put her in front of him. He says, y'all have wanted to do this for years, because they were in the same age group. He says, just hit her. And he said it shocked them so much, but then they laughed. But what that did was that broke that sadness, that broke that outrage. It broke that feeling, and it allowed them to just move up the spectrum just a little bit so that they could find some peace and a higher vibration. Okay, back to Dr. Kim. The reason we want to always be working our way up the frequency spectrum is that the further you get away from the density and heaviness of feeling very attached to your mind and physical body, the closer you get to the end where you feel unity consciousness, where you're not a separate entity, but are connected to everyone and everything around you. This is where you know you are pure vibration and energy. This is where you realize you are spirit and that you are aligned with love. The things that are created and that live here are things like wholeness and compassion. This is that big picture view I've been talking about in the quotes. When you are able to soften instead of stiffen in the face of undesirable circumstances, resolution can happen because you are in neutrality rather than duality. And neutrality is just one short hop away from unity conscious and wholeness. The higher on the frequency spectrum you can rise, the better. But just softening and allowing it to raise as little as 2% causes every cell in your body to begin shifting. Now listen to what she says here. I am a medical doctor who has learned all about how to fix the body with surgical procedures and medication. But all of that resides on the end of the spectrum where the mind is and approaches any illness from the perspective of fixing the problem. And I'm not saying that medication doesn't have its place. Absolutely it does. But when we shift and raise our frequency to the other end of the spectrum, we can receive that medication or surgical procedure from a completely different place within ourselves that allows our body to truly heal instead of just temporarily dealing with symptoms. When we choose to shift our frequency instead of only managing and solving physical problems, it allows everything to come into alignment for us. So that's the end of the piece by Dr. Kim. And obviously there at the end, she was talking about how even our physical body benefits from raising our vibration. But I believe that concept can also be broadened to include the healing of our emotional trauma as well. Let's go back just for a second to that scenario I was talking about in our imagination. Imagine if just half of the people who decided to go to the Capitol on Washington that day, imagine if just half the people instead had said, okay, I'm outraged, I'm triggered. So what can I do to heal me? And what can I do to get myself in a vibration where I'm in alignment with love so that I can send love and peace to those men and women in the Capitol who are trying and working to try to run our government? What if that had happened instead of what did happen? That's what can happen, but we've got to stop the outrage and raise our vibration. So yes, we should have compassion for those who are obviously suffering. And yes, it is still a noble thing to stand up for someone who's being wronged, if they've been put directly in your path and it is made clear to you that it is your work to do. And even then, you have to approach it with a certain level of detachment. But for the most part, big picture, we need to stop taking on burdens that don't belong to us, because most of the time, they're just triggering things we need to fix within ourselves anyway. 95% of the time, you being outraged about something that doesn't directly affect you does nothing to help the person who actually is being affected by it, and only serves to lower the collective vibration. So I'm going to end with the same words I started with today. And as I'm saying them, I'm going to encourage you to adopt the attitude of no more drama, and to begin to learn how to be your own healer. Anything that annoys you is teaching you patience. Anyone who abandons you is teaching you how to stand on your own 2 feet. Anything that angers you is teaching you forgiveness and compassion. Anything that has power over you is teaching you how to take your power back. Anything you hate is teaching you unconditional love. Anything you fear is teaching you courage. Anything you can't control, including the lives and journeys of others, is teaching you how to let go. You will continue to suffer if you have an emotional reaction to everything that is said to you or everything you observe happening that you consider sad or unjust. True power is sitting back and observing. True power is restraint. If words or circumstances control you, that means others can control you. Breathe and allow things to pass. Amen?
Look at God, everybody. That was amazing today. And I came in about halfway through. I'm having to do that some this semester. I have a class from 10 to 11:20 on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but I caught quite a bit, and what I caught was a blessing. The non-reaction, learning to find our vibrational matches. If we want to be at peace, then we can't always be overly angered about things. Do what we can. I took a wonderful cue from Bishop T.D. Jakes years ago, learning to segment and compartmentalize our emotions, and that is, as Scripture says, having done all to stand. LaDonna talked about whether it's the care for animals, the care for human beings, people that come across our path, whether it's our children, our loved ones, do everything we can with what we have in our hands, and then at the end of the day, don't carry that pain body. Don't carry that heavy emotional all the time around. I think one of the greatest examples that LaDonna and I have experienced of this is the homeless ministry that we connect with each week to reach out to our homeless brothers and sisters in Atlanta. The woman who runs that homeless ministry, her name's Teresa Hamilton. We call her Lady T. She is about 4 foot nothing, the littlest piece of something you've ever seen in your life. And every day of her life, her passion is not just to care for those who do not have a home. She is not working in a homeless shelter. There is no really level of organization or rules. She literally is going into the highways and hedges, under bridges, by rivers, in the back of a grocery store, people coming out of the woods to get food from her. There is all levels of poverty, disease, hopelessness, depression. She is in it every day of her life. When I see her, she is not cowed down. She is not carrying that emotional baggage of, oh my God, the world is so awful. Look at all this that I have to do. She is literally a bubbling up of joy. Does that mean that everything she deals with is joyful? No. It means she is doing what she can. I'm doing what I can for my brothers and sisters that God has called me to do. Churches are surrounding to help me finance this, to give power to it. And when I'm done with my ministry at the end of the day, I go home and laugh. I go home and enjoy my life. And so we have to be able to find joy even in the midst of having to do some things that may be difficult, to see. It doesn't mean that it doesn't mean our head's in the sand. It means that our head is above the sand. We're aware of what we're seeing, but we're also not carrying. As Eckhart Tolle said, we have not become that heavy pain body, carrying all that emotion in us. And so hopefully that was a blessing to you today. I'm learning as I'm sitting here as well. We look forward to seeing everybody tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. We'll continue our journey in the power of now. And then Sunday morning, remember, tune in and help me get a good grade. Sunday morning is Buddhist Day at Spirit and Truth Sanctuary, and it's going to be an amazing day because I'm going to compare a lot of Tibetan Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh's teaching, his life, to his very close friend, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. They worked together both in civil rights, social justice, anti-war protests. They did so many wonderful things together. Dr. Martin Luther King actually nominated, I think 1963, nominated Thich Nhat Hanh for the Nobel Peace Prize. And so they have a wonderful connection, and we're gonna talk about some of the similarities of their teachings this Sunday morning. So join us for that. And then last but not least, we want to give some shouts out to everybody before we say goodbye. To Mary Hayes, Sheila Smith, Pastor Dom, Bobby Moore Howard, Pastor Gloria, Kessa, Terry, Laverne, Callie, Elaine, hey Miss Elaine, Ben and Vicki Mullins, Emma, Alita, Doreen, Annette, Richard Lovey, Rosaline Cooper, sending our love to you. Megan Lynch, Janice Gibson, and Leslie Harmon, thank you so much for joining us today. Have a great week. Get that head out of the sand. Be the light that you can be. Do what you have, what's in your hand, and then don't carry that pain around with you. Be the joy of the Lord, and let it be your strength. Go in peace, and we'll see you again tomorrow night.